Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So thanks so much, Sean and everybody, for letting me talk today. So I didn't know what to call this, so I called it Methods in Home Brewing. And so hopefully this will be a challenge to others to tell us how do you home brew, because there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm excited to learn other ways. And so I know we were talking about people who've got the Robo Brew or some of the other brewing systems. And so I'd love to hear how those work as well. But this is how I brew. I brew in a bag. All right. So if you haven't met me, hi, my name is David, and I brew in a bag. And there I am making some beer, and there's my setup. I'm brewing in a bag. So like Sean said, I've been brewing in a bag for a long time. So I've been a brewer for about 7 years now, and I've been doing the brew in a bag setup for about 4.5. So I've got a lot of batches under my belt, and I've screwed a lot of stuff up, but made a lot of good beer too. So I have hopefully be able to tell a little bit about my experience. And so I'm relatively new in the club. So I think I came to my first meeting probably about a year ago. Probably August last year was the first one I showed up to. And then I joined the club in January. So it's been great, and it's exciting to get to talk to you all here today. Okay. So what is brew in a bag? So before we get to what brew in a bag is, maybe we can do a little bit of review of what brewing is. Okay, so we'll actually work in reverse. We'll start all the way here on the right-hand side, and so there's beer. And we always like to say that brewers make beer, but then there's that expression that, no, brewers make wort, the yeast make beer. And so brewers make this wort, which is that sugary solution, and then we pitch the yeast into it, and the yeast eat up that sugar and turn it into beer for us. Great. So then where does the wort come from? So the wort comes out of our boil. We boil this sugary solution with hops. But where does the sugar come from? We keep going back in time here. Now we're at the beginning. The sugar comes from starch that's stored in the yeast. And so when we put our grains in this warm bath that we call the mash, what happens is that there's little enzymes inside of the grain called amylase that break up that starch, those long chains of sugar, into these tiny little 2 pairs of sugar, this maltose. And so that's the yeast food right there, and that's what the yeast likes to eat, and we need to feed the yeast in order to be able to turn it into beer. And so we need to do this mashing step before we boil it in order to be able to turn this starch, which is generally not edible by yeast, depending on what yeast variety you are working with here, and we need to turn it into this more edible maltose version. So that's called the mash. So if you go to a commercial brewery, or perhaps if you're an advanced home brewer and you've got a really nice flashy setup, then you might have what's called a 3-tier brewing system. And so what that 3-tier means is that you've got 3 different containers, and each of these containers has a different job. And so on the left side here, you've got this container called a hot liquor tun. And so what that is, it's got water in it and then a heating coil. And so that allows you to heat this water up to a certain temperature. And then once that water is at your temperature that you're looking for, you can then move the water from that left tun into the mash tun, which is your second metal container here in the middle. And that's where all your grain is sitting there. And so you want your mash to be at a specific temperature, so that way those enzymes will be able to work just right to be able to cut up the grain, to cut up the starch just right into that maltose. So you need to regulate that temperature very carefully in your mash in order to be able to optimize that reaction depending on what style of beer you're trying to make. So then when you're done with all that, you need to boil it, and so, but you've got all this extra grain sitting at the bottom of your mash tun. So then the third step is you move it out of your mash tun and you move it into your boil kettle, which is exactly what it says on the name. It boils the mash, and so you move all of that wort out of the mash tun into the boil kettle, and then you run your boil, you add your hops, and then ultimately you pull it off, and then you add it to your fermenter down there at the bottom. So if you're a professional brewer and you go to a professional brewery, you'll see these 3 different containers, and they're all, probably bigger than any of us are. They're huge. And like I said, if you're a home brewer with a really nice setup, you might have a 3-tier system like this. So I live in a 700 square foot apartment, so I don't have room for this massive setup right here, even though I would love to have one. So what can I do? Is there any way that I can downsize this huge setup that we've got here? We've got these three huge cans. Wouldn't it be great if we could take one container and have that one container serve all three purposes? And let me tell you, there is such a way. Oh, and there's my question right there, my cue setting up my joke. What if there is a container, brew in a bag? So this is our solution to the problem here. So we're going to use this highly advanced piece of technology, this mesh bag here, and that's going to allow us to be able to use one kettle to do all three of those purposes. Okay, so brew in a bag. We've got one pot, but we're going to use it for three different jobs. So step one, what we're going to do is we're going to take the pot and we're going to heat water to a desired temperature that we want it to for mashing. So that's step one, that's the hot liquor ton. After that, step two, then we're going to take this mesh bag and we're going to put it in the pot. And then step three, we're going to add the grains into the bag, and then we're going to hold that at the desired mash temperature. So that's our second container, that's the mash tun. So then we're going to hold it there for as long as we want to run our mash for, maybe 60 or 90 minutes. And then when it's done, we grab the sides of the bag and you hoist it out of the pot. So that's going to take all the grain, all the hulls with you, and it's going to leave behind all that sugary liquid in the pot, which is our wort.
Dave, can I jump in a little bit, ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So when you're setting up the water and the grain in advance, what's your water to grain mash ratio? How do you determine that before you get started to hit your right temperature?
So that's a great question. I use a calculator. That helps me figure it all out. I'm gonna get to that in a little bit. We'll talk about that question. So that's a good question. And so then after that, then you bring the wort to a boil and you add your hops as desired, and so then it acts as the boil kettle. And so that's basically it there. And so it's pretty simple. And so as far as what do I need to brew in a bag? You don't need a whole lot, and that's kind of the beauty of this method. And so you need a pot, and so my particular pot is about 7 gallons. Although you can do it with a bigger pot, and there are certainly constraints about using a smaller pot, as I'll talk about on the next couple slides. You also need one of these mesh bags, so you can get these at your homebrew shop. I'm sure Eric has got them. I think they're about maybe $10. And they're even reusable too, so you can rinse all the grain out and let it dry and fold it up, and then you can bring it right out for your next batch. And then the last thing you need is that you need a thermometer in order to be able to keep track of your temperatures. And so we're replacing these water tons here and with our one pot, which don't necessarily have a thermometer on it. So we need to keep a careful eye on what the temperature is on our heating water and on our mash, so that way we can hit our targets. So you generally probably you need a thermometer, and you need probably a pretty good thermometer will help you out. So I've got a thermopen, which is shown here, and I've got my masher at 152. And so that's a nice choice if you're looking for a nice digital thermometer, and it's good in the kitchen too if you like to cook meats and roasts and that type of stuff. Okay. So recipes. So that was the question that Alex was asking about. So what recipes can I use for brew in a bag? Basically any recipe. So if you have an all grain recipe, there's no special conversion. It's particularly necessary in order to be able to convert it to brew in a bag. When I'm looking at my recipes, I like to be concerned, or the main thing that I'm concerned about is the total volume of the mash. And so what I say by that, I mean the volume of water. So that's how much water, how much liquid is in the pot, combined with the volume of grain. So the grain also has volume as well. So when you pour the grain in, the total volume of the liquid in the pot is going to come up. So your total mash volume needs to be less than the size of your pot. Otherwise, you're going to make a mess on your stove as your pot flows over onto the stove. So how do you adapt that? So one thing you can do is if your volume is too high, you can decrease your batch size. And so I think a lot of people, or at least I used to when I began, I typically made 5-gallon batches, but I've actually switched a lot to making smaller batch sizes now. I usually brew with 3-gallon batches because it makes less beer, which I will actually then drink faster, which then I get to brew faster. And so especially now that I'm stuck inside more with the quarantine, it's been nice to have more brewing going on at my house. If you want to make a really, really big beer, so you want to make some type of imperial stout or imperial super saison, if you will, then you may want to replace some of your base malt with extract. And so that is a way around that. If I want to make a huge beer somewhere in the 1080 or 1090 range, I'll usually swap out some of my base malt and then add extract into the boil. And of course, if you're concerned with your total volume and you really want to get there, then you can buy an even bigger pot. It's the final solution. So where do I get my recipes? So I really like Brewing Classic Styles. I think it's a great book for all levels of brewers. It's got extract recipes, and then it tells you how to convert them to all grain. So I use that as a great starting guide. I also like Designing Great Beers. I like the kind of the first part of Designing Great Beers, where it teaches you about the math and that type of stuff. I think some of the style guidelines are a little out of date, but I like the way that it teaches you how to calculate gravities and things like that. Okay, so that's how much grain I want to use, but how do I figure out how much water I want to use or how much water I want to add? So I like to use calculators, tools called calculators, let people smarter than me figure out and help me out. And so the particular calculator I like is this calculator called the Priceless Brew in a Bag calculator. And so there's the link, but if you just Google Priceless BIAB into Google, I'm sure it'll probably be the first thing to come up. And so what you can do, so here's a picture of it. This is what it looks like if you go to that website, is that you can set all kinds of different settings into your calculator, and then it spits out results over here in the right-hand column. So you can say that if I have a target gravity of a certain amount, and I want to make this much beer, so my final beer is going to be about, let's say, 5.5 gallons, and I want to hit this mash temperature of 154, and I have this many pounds of grain, and I'm going to boil it for this long, then it's able to calculate and do, okay, the grain's going to absorb this much water, you're going to boil off this much liquid, and it does all the math for you and spits out a very easy kind of solution for you to solve. So then over here on the right-hand calendar under my results, it tells you, okay, so you want to make a 5.5 gallon batch, and you need to start with 7.61 gallons of water. You should heat the water to the strike temperature, that's 160.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that's when you add your grain. And so it's a little bit of a thermodynamics problem there. So you heat it up slightly warmer than your mash. So even though I'm mashing at 154, I'm going to heat the water a little bit warmer to 160, because then when you add in your grains, which are probably room temperature, that hot water is going to cool off a little bit. And the goal is that it's going to land you right there in the nice window of 154 of whatever your target is. So this is the Priceless calculator, and so I've been using this basically since I started brewing in a bag. I think the calculator is pretty good, but it does take some batches to dial in on some of the more advanced parameters. So things like you can adjust it based on your mash density if you want to adjust by that. I found that for me, I was struggling with boil rate. So the default value on the boil rate didn't match my boil rate on my system at all. And so I was getting all kinds of low efficiencies, and I was all over the place. But once I kind of figured out which dial to turn on the calculator, now I can hone it in and feel pretty good about my result. And so this is only part of the calculator. I couldn't fit it all on my screen here, but if you scroll down, there are more advanced settings below in the bag calculator. Okay, so should I squeeze the bag? So when I hear about brew in a bag, there's all kinds of myths and legends about home brewing, and so some people say, well, what about squeezing the bag? So I squeeze the bag. I squeeze the bag like crazy, and so here is when you pull the bag out, the grain is still very wet, so you can imagine like a sponge. The grain is going to hold all that liquid, and then it's going to be dripping out back into the pot. And so at this step, what I do is you can either squeeze the bag above the pot. I actually usually move it into an empty fermenter bucket and then squeeze it at the bottom of the bucket and then dump the bucket into my pot, my kettle again, just to kind of get that extra liquid out. So that grain is wet, and that it's not just wet with water, but it's wet with sugar as well. And so that's gravity, that's points, that's efficiency that you want to get into your brew kettle. So some people say, no, don't squeeze the bag because squeezing the bag is going to release tannins, and that's going to make your beer taste bad. And so to each their own. I find that my beer tastes pretty good. In my defense, Brewlosophy, who's this brewing website that I really like, they do these brewing experiments. And they tried squeezing the bag as one of their tests, and they found that there was no taste difference in their stout that they made when they squeezed the bag versus not squeezing the bag. So in the debate of should I squeeze the bag, I'm on the bag squeezer side. That's the side that I'd take. All right, what about efficiency? So that's the other thing that people talk about is that if you're brewing in a bag, you're going to get really poor efficiency. So I measure my efficiency. I get 72% efficiency on my setup. I believe it's possible, or I've heard that's possible, that you can tweak your efficiency by adjusting how finely ground your grains are. So when you go to a brew store, you can ask the Eric, or you can ask the person working there to double grind your grains, and so your grain will be in a more fine powder. So I've done that sometimes before. In my personal experience, I found that sometimes I ask Eric to do it, and sometimes I forget to ask Eric to do it, and either way, I hit the same gravity no matter what. So I really am not sure if it matters or not. I'm probably gonna stop asking him because it's one less step for him to do. But there is some debate about efficiency as well. And so my Brewlosophy guy, he also suggests that grind does affect beer taste, but it's a little bit more complicated than just a simple increase in efficiency. So it tasted a little bit different, not just as far as points of gravity and things like that. So if you're curious about that, you can go read their article on their blog. And so that's kind of the end of my introduction. Can I make good beer using brew in a bag? I would say absolutely. And so like I said, I've been brewing for about 4.5 years using brew in a bag. And the things that I like about it is that it's got very few pieces of equipment. I can tuck it all away in my closet without, my wife getting too mad at having a huge brewing setup. It's very low cost. It might be a lot of pieces that you may already have if you're an extract brewer. And it's a great way to learn more about the hobby and move out of extract brewing into either a partial mash or even a whole mash using brew in a bag. All right, so that's all my slides that I had prepared. So I had a couple of questions in there to hopefully kind of spark some discussion. But otherwise, I'll open it up to everybody if you want to learn a little bit more about brewing.
So up front, you mentioned wondering how this compared to how other people are brewing, especially the all-in-one systems like Digiboil, RoboBrew, Grandfather.
Sure.
This looks very similar. I mean, the bag winds up being a basket that you can lift out when you're done mashing. So, much like you're lifting that out when you're done. I've never done boil in a bag, but I think the points about you might already have the equipment, but you may also need to scale. Good points, but otherwise, I think it's very, very similar to the all-in-one systems.
Cool.
So one of the aspects, if I can jump in now, one of the aspects of picking up the bag as a mechanism of straining it is that it's going to weigh a lot. So how do you compensate? I mean, unless that's your workout and you're brewing, so how do you suspend it while you're squeezing it and all of that? Especially it's going to be too hot to handle, so you're not squeezing it with your bare hands, presumably.
For sure.
So how do you manage that step? I mean, there's got to be technique involved there.
That's a great question. Yeah, so I'm definitely not a big burly type of guy. So I'm not hulking the huge bag. So there's different methods that you can use. So like the Brewlosophy guys, they've got kind of a rig setup where you can attach it to a cable, and then you can pull the cable, and then that pulls the bag out of the pot. So it's probably a little bit more advanced if you have a whole garage or a setup where you can do that. That's one method, and then you can let the bag kind of drain out. So my method that I typically use is that I will, so you're right, it is hot because it's at mash temperature. It's at 150 degrees. And so you don't want to be holding that with your hands. So I've got a pair of rubber gloves that I use, like rubber food, gloves that you might use in your oven to take a hot pan out of the oven. But they're also waterproof as well. I'll fold up the edges of the bag, and then I'll grab it with my rubber gloves. I'll hold it a little bit over the pot, let it drip a little bit, and then I'll kind of very quickly move the bag into a big bucket, one of my big empty fermenters. So I'll let it sit at the bottom of the fermenter, and then I'll kind of, rather than hold it, I'll rather kind of almost like a punch, like kind of push down and squeeze it into the bottom of the bucket, and then empty the bucket into my pot. And so rather than kind of holding it up with one hand and squeezing it, I'm definitely not strong enough to be doing that, but that's kind of my method as far as how I squeeze the bag.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
This is Jack. One idea too. I don't know if anybody brought this up yet, but when I have done brewing a bag, I've also used like a cookie cooling sheet. So I'll just throw that with it's grated and just throw that on top of your pot
bag and
just swap it. Yeah, and just let it sit there and it'll just drop its way through. And then you can kind of just twist the bag and start to let the water seep out. That's it's another way of doing it. And then you can also rinse over it if you need to by using that cookie cooling sheet, rack, whatever. Just another idea.
I like that.
And are you guys rinsing those grains?
I usually don't. And so there are some people you can do that. So you could take your bag out, squeeze it, and then you can put it into another pot of water, almost like a lauter type of system with the brew in the bag. In mine, I don't, but I know that you can do that, and that is possible with brew in a bag, and it will probably get you more higher efficiency. Get you a couple more points of gravity out of your grains.
Yeah, I'll do usually kind of piggyback on what Jack says. I'll just use a colander and I'll just literally pick it up, stick the colander underneath, and just sit it on there. And then I'll just take I'll have some water already heated up, and I'll just pretty much rinse it right out into the pot, and then just start with my boil.
So yeah, and just to add, the Matt Brewing Company has something called a mash press. So they do their mash in a separate vessel, and then they pump the beer over to this thing, looks like kind of an accordion-like, filter-like, and they compress it and they squeeze the liquid out from the grain, which is very similar to the brew in the bag. And they claim that they get better mash efficiency with that method. So this brew in a bag, the efficiencies you're quoting here for yourself are about 3 to 5% more efficient than my lauter ton at home when I do the regular system. So that's just a point I thought you guys would be interested in.
Dave, how do you maintain your mash temperature? Because I know that's always a challenge with, just a one pot that's not insulated. Do you use the stovetop to do that?
I do, yeah. And so that is kind of the other thing is so that, with these all-in-one systems, my understanding is that there's a thermostat and you can, kind of set it and forget it, that type of brewing. And so with the brew in a bag, you don't have that. So you have to kind of control and know how hot does your stove get in order to kind of keep it right at that limit of 152. And so usually, yes. So I've either fortunately or unfortunately, I've brewed in 3 different apartments on 3 different stoves, a glass top, a coil top, and now a gas top. So I've got all kinds of experience of learning exactly how these different stoves will keep temperature. And so I usually keep it on very, very, at least with the gas that I'm on now, I usually keep it very, very low with the lid on. And then even that will sometimes creep it up a point or two. And so I usually will then turn it off and then let it, kind of go back down maybe a degree or two. I check it maybe every 10 or 15 minutes. And so I pop the lid off and stick the thermometer in and then quickly cover it up. And then I, adjust my gas on my stove to nudge it up or nudge it down as appropriate. So it does, yes. So it does require a little bit of babysitting during the mash state in order to kind of keep it at your target.
And just to add to that, because I've done brew in a bag as well, if you have a sous vide works very well to maintain that mash temperature as well. And the one way to do that is that you don't put it right in the grain. At least I have not. I do it like in this picture you have there. Like I'll take the bag and put the sous vide to the right of the bag in the pot so that it's not directly in the grain, but it's circulating the water and will keep it at that temperature. So that's just another option if you have that or have access to one. It definitely helps if you're, just trying to keep that steady temperature, or if you're trying to do any type of rise, that makes it easier to like kind of hit those rises. If you're trying to do a step mash as brew in a bag, you can do that using a sous vide.
Did somebody? I think somebody shared recently the Brew Vide is coming out.
That was me. I got an email about that. So someone is designing like a basically a sous vide for brewing, and so they were looking for beta testers. I put my name in the hat, but I've not heard anything yet. I even told them like we were part of a homebrew club, and if they wanted us to use the club as a vehicle to test it, to let us know. So hopefully, we'll see.
And if you don't want to heat your mash, you can also just wrap it in a sleeping bag, right?
Yeah,
you could.
I used to do that. I think at least during the summer, I lost about 4 degrees over the course of the mash, which is not that bad at all.
Yeah, there's a couple different tricks you can try to turn your pot, make your pot a little more insulated.
Yep.
Than just a aluminum sheet.
How many people brew in a bag here, just by a show of hands on the... It's like there's a good group. I know I do sometimes. Depends on the beer, depends on the gravity, depends on how much I want to make. Like if I want to do 10 gallons, I can't brew in a bag. But if I'm doing a lower, I have found it much easier to just only have one thing to clean is really nice. So it does make a huge difference.
Does anyone have an idea of what a good hard stop is as far as a grain to water ratio in your mash, particularly when doing brew in a bag?
I don't know off the top of my head, and I think it would really depend on the size of your kettle, and there's all those different components that would give you that. But I'm sure there's a calculator out there that would tell you that, but I don't know off the top of my head if anyone else has an idea.
Yeah, I guess in my experience, calculators are more gated by actual volume of work towards the end of it, right? Which I think, you could always top up, you could sparge, so I think those don't really take those into account that much. You could turn out a 3-4 gallon batch in a 5 gallon pot with brew in a bag if you just top up after your mash.
Right.
I've been interested to try it, so it's good to see what all goes into it. I made the jump from extract to grain father, which I missed out on a lot of that, a lot of the intermediary stuff there. But I keep seeing the what is it, 100, 150 pulleys that show up in homebrew finds for, I assume, lifting bags, probably more volume than you're doing. But I'd be interested to try this out sometime.
Yeah, I will say for those who, I've done bigger batches outside with a 15-gallon kettle, and if you got a 15-pound, 18-pound grain bill, it's obviously, this is stating the obvious, but it's not 15 pounds after you stick it in the mash. So you do need that hoist or way to be able to pull it up and give it time to hang, unless, you're you're way more, stronger than I am, obviously, to be able to hold that up over the kettle. But they have a lot of setups to help you do that. These tripods, these, I just took a ladder and drilled a little pulley system into the ladder to be able to pull the grain bag, out for when I have larger volume or larger OG, so you got to be ready for that.
One thing that hasn't been talked about, or at least maybe if it has, I hadn't heard it. I wasn't paying attention. But one of the things that I think is a benefit for doing brewing in the bag is time. Like, I tried brewing a bag one time when I was transitioning from partial mash to all grain, and I was ultimately headed towards a 3-tier system, but I was sort of experimenting, and I didn't like brewing a bag just because it was clumsy and I couldn't figure out how to deal with what we were all talking about, the weight of the bag and ergonomics and everything. And thinking about it now, after several years, five years probably of all grain brewing, I just think about the amount of time that I waste waiting on my kettle to get to boil after sparging, because I'm using gravity. So by the time all my sparge water gets through my grains down into my kettle, it's now at 140 degrees or 150 degrees, and now I have to wait for another 40 minutes for it to get up to boil temperature. So brewing a bag, to me, it's like, wow, it's already at 152 or whatever degrees, and it's like I don't even have to wait for it to rinse. So
no, you can be heating it up as soon as that bag comes up, you fire it up. Yeah.
So while you're squeezing the bag, so I have my bag in a bucket and I'm squeezing it in the bucket. But while I'm doing that, the gas is cranked on the pot, so it's already, and it didn't cool off like you said, so it's still at mash temperature, and then we can crank it and we can go.
I've actually experimented with putting a hot plate on my floor under my boil kettle while I spun.
That's one way to do it. Any other brew in a bag? Either you do it, observations, questions?
Yeah, so I don't do brew in a bag, and this comes from sort of the idea about getting the dough from the grain into the kettle when you boil, because you're going to release precursors to stale beer flavors, and so that's one of the reasons why I like the mash, is because, when I foil out to get everything clear before I move it. But, that whole stage where you're working to avoid those things is kind of impossible with the brew in the bag, right? You're going to get everything that goes through the bag, which isn't a fine enough sieve.
Yep.
So, that's why I hesitate. Now, on the other hand, if you drink your beer quick enough, it doesn't matter, right? So it's all a matter of, like, if you're putting it up for a year and you're brewing a big beer, I would say it's going to hurt you, but if you're brewing a New England IPA, it's probably going to help you. So, that's where I stand on that, and it's mainly on that particular point.
Another point for smaller batches too, so you drink them faster.
Actually, that's something I was wondering. You were mentioning ways to deal with the volume. Anybody else? You're doing 3-gallon batches. Anybody else doing anything? And going to a bigger pot to do 5 gallons, or adding extract, or just dealing with lower volume.
I mess around in volume a lot. I mean, I think I started in a 5-gallon pot, brewing a bag, probably doing about 2.5, 3-gallon batches. Moved towards a 14-gallon pot, doing about 5 to 7-gallon batches, brewing a bag, sometimes splitting. Moved back down just because I wanted to drink. I couldn't drink all that beer. 5-gallon pot, sometimes doing extra, partial mash, kind of topping up with extract at the end, diluting, getting up to 5 gallons, 4 gallons. Now I'm actually, all the way downsized to a pico brew, So doing about 1.5 gallon batches, which is kind of a brew and bag system in itself too. So there's a lot of flexibility there. I mean, you can manipulate the water in all kinds of ways, and manipulate your gravity with extract if you need to get higher volumes out of smaller systems.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of both. So if you've got make that big beer, then I'll cut some of the base malt and replace it with extract. Or like I said, if I have a beer that I really want to make, I'll just switch to make a smaller volume of it. So, which is pretty easy to do because at this point, it moves very linearly. And so if you want to move from a 5 gallon batch to a 2.5 gallon batch, you basically just divide everything in half. And it's the math isn't too complicated as far as how to do that type of conversion.
So a follow-up question on that. So I can see in terms of the grain, the water, et cetera, maybe even the hops. I mean, do you scale everything up or down proportionately, including the yeast? Or I'm just wondering if everything is really that, linearly scalable.
So in my personal experience, I scale everything except the yeast. So I scale the grain and I scale the hops. And then in my 3 gallon batch, I'll usually pitch a whole packet of yeast. Mm-hmm. And so I find that over pitching yeast is very hard to do. And in fact, having a little bit extra yeast is probably good for you. And so the yeast packets are, if you read them, they say they're meant for a 5 gallon batch of 1050 wort maybe. And so if I'm putting a whole packet in a 3 gallon batch of 1040 wort, then am I overdoing it? Probably, but it'll help that ferment start quicker. And so to me, that helps it a little bit better.
I agree with that pitching thing, that it's much easier to underpitch than to overpitch. So I generally draw the line at a gravity of about 1060 or so, where I start thinking about putting 2 packets in instead of 1. And the packets are just, like you said, right, they're just one, they're geared towards a certain gravity, a certain amount of sugar. So, it doesn't matter. It's the faster you come to a ferment, the better off you are, actually. So if you overpitch, you're actually better off, and especially if you're an ale brewer, because then you're going to increase, because the ferment's going to get a little bit wilder, you're going to increase the fruity flavors and the spicy flavors that you want from the yeast anyway. So, yeah, when in doubt, overpitch.
Well, I don't know where Sean went.
Sean's actually running down the street to.
He just sent me a text. He's on his way here. So if you guys need him, give him 2 minutes to be right here.
He asked me if anybody, if anybody had any other questions, and I did. I was wondering about the saisons. If I wanted to go for out of the pack that we got from Pinocchio's, which is the most stereotypical? I want to go for the Sophie, but also right now I want to go for the most stereotypical saison.
Yeah, the 2 Roads was pretty much a generic saison version, so it's going to hit all of those points. It's a lot, probably the Allagash too. I'm not drinking it right now. I'm drinking the Sophie right now. Chloe's showing us the Allagash. What do you think, Chloe? Is it average, typical?
I think that based on your descriptions, it's very typical. It's very tasty, and I really enjoyed it. It really fits the flavor profile, in my opinion.
Well, there you go, Mike.
I wanted to get an idea of, which is a good exemplar for the style, because I just drank Jack's. We had the bottle share today, and that included a saison. So I really liked this. It had some of the wild characteristics in there. And now I'm going to pop the Allagash to compare it.
It's too bad. I wanted to get the yards into the 4-pack, but they don't make their Saison anymore. When Yards makes their Saison, they don't use any herbs at all. So really, you're just tasting the malt and the yeast. And Michael just took off, so he's not hearing any of this. But yeah, so if you really wanted to just know what the yeast is doing in the Saison, the Yards would have been perfect. But they stopped, so that was the end of that story.
What do you like to do with your yeast when you brew a Saison as far as temperature goes? Like, do you like to drive it really, really hot or keep it kind of cool?
No, I don't drive it too hard. I keep it up around 70, 72. I really have major phobias of temperatures that are high. I like to brew ales that are cleaner in flavor profile. So I like being down around, say, 65 for a California ale yeast or something like that. But for the Belgians, I give myself permission to let it get up around 72. But there's people who take it up to 75, and not complain.
So for any extract brewers out there, we brewed in anticipation of this meeting from Northern Brewer. Northern Brewer has a lemon drop Saison extract kit, which we brewed, and it turned out pretty well. So if you do extract brewing and want to try a Saison, the Northern Brewer lemon drop has got some nice flavors.
So let me ask you then, how close was my extract recipe to the one that you used? Because I was just guessing on that.
To be honest, Alex, I'm not sure. I'm kind of forgetting at the moment the Northern Brewer. So you can, on their website, they have the instructions which list the malt bill or the extract bill and everything. So you could check later. Right now, it's slipping my mind as to what the grain bill was on that. But
okay.
And the other thing I noticed in terms of the Saison, the 4-pack, which I did not get, but I was looking at them, and you're talking about the Allagash, and that I think is the only one of the 4 that has oats in the grain bill, which sometimes, the oats give it a little bit of extra, whatever, fluffiness or slightly different character.
Right, yeah, the oats give it that unctuous mouthfeel, if you will, kind of oily mouthfeel, which, is good in some beers. Back in the early days, like the mid-'80s out east, there wasn't a lot of craft beer, and the one that everybody started out with was oatmeal stout, and I was a big oatmeal stout fan. I love the stuff. Now, hardly anybody makes it, but I still think that that's a great style of beer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think your Saison stands up really well, at least to this. This is more citrusy, and it's a lighter color than yours, but otherwise very, very comparable.
Oh, thanks.
Awesome.
I just drank it.
In terms of local breweries, I think up in Ambler, Forest and Maine, they do a lot of Saisons and farmhouse ales and that kind of stuff. So if anybody's out and around and wants to, I'm not sure what they're doing these days. I guess they're serving along with some required food purchase or whatever, but Forest and Maine is pretty good at this style too, I think.
Okay. Well, Tired Hands makes a living off of Saisons, don't they? So that's another place you could go for it.
Forest and Maine. Hey, everybody. I've changed locations. I left for the traffic to go by. Forest and Maine's doing delivery. So if you're interested in Forest and Maine, you can buy it online. and they will deliver to Delco every other Thursday. So, and then they're also at the Ambler Farmers Market on the weekends as well. But they do make great saisons. Yeah. They make a saison where the yeast is harvested from the tree that's in the front of their brewery. Is that the rosé? I forget the name of it, which is just outstanding. It's a great beer.
Everybody's getting so into this wild yeast game now. I mean, they're getting them from everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah, you are.
So, any other saison related? We don't have to keep the lights on me. Now it's like we're at like a haunted story. Like I'm gonna start telling. It's like we're at a campfire. I just thought we'd jump into just any questions people are having, challenges. You want to ask your fellow bomber what you've been doing. Do you have any things that people can help you out with?
I've got one. I extract brew, and for the last 2 years, I've tried to adjust the water to whatever type of beer I'm brewing. Look up the recipe, and I treat the water. And as far as my taste buds tell me, I'm doing okay. But then I read the other day that when they make extract, they've already accommodated some water change, or they're not making it with distilled water. So anybody know that? Would you treat the water differently if you're doing extract?
I mean, I would assume that with extract, most of the impact of the water is in the mash. That there's only going to be a small proportion of the actual impact of the water on the flavor of the beer. I would think most of that has already been impacted. It's baked into the extract itself. I would think. I mean, AC, you probably have more thoughts on that.
No, I guess I didn't understand that. When you're saying it's partial mash, so you're telling me that the water affects what happens in the mash, but not what happens subsequently?
Well, the mash when they created the extract.
There's just so much more. There's so much more water being used in the mash that creates the extract that's used in brewing, right?
Got it.
You're not actually you're only using possibly less than 5 gallons of water in your beer. The other, 4 gallons of water has been used by the producer of the extract. Or 5 gallons or 6 gallons or whatever it takes to make that extract.
So should I cut back on the amount of stuff that I add to treat the water?
I would say yes. I mean, I agree with that comment that, a lot of the chemistry of the water revolves around whether or not you're extracting tannins from the grain and that kind of thing. So there are certain things that contribute to the flavor profile. If you want a beer that's got a chalky aftertaste, if you're big on, the British Pale Ales, which you might be, then you're going to be favoring that kind of chalkiness in the beer, and so you might continue to add it for that. But it's not going to affect your processing at all. And I would say, for the most part, if you have bought a kit that's an English Pale Ale, they may have accounted for that already. And so when they evaporate the water off of the grain, the salts will remain. And so, it'll carry through to the final beer. What I don't know is if they're actually going that far with the extracting process, which seems to me like they might not.
I was at the Marston Brewery in Burton-on-Trent the other year, and of course, that's gypsum capital of the world. And interestingly enough, they had stacks of 100-pound bags of gypsum in there. I guess they're not getting enough out of the local water anymore.
That's pretty funny, actually.
I thought so. Thanks, guys. That what you said makes sense. Thanks.
Dave, I would take that as just a load off. That's one less thing you have to actually worry about.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a small announcement I'd like to make. Hi, guys. For anybody who's interested in brewing kombucha, I will have a new batch of Scobies ready very soon. If you want to get one in a bag and start your own, I can give you some tips. But I seem to be one of the few kombucha makers here in the club. But carry on. Just contact me if you want to get a Scobie.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to brew a lot more kombucha. I got one of your Scobies. It made a good kombucha, so it worked. But it's kind of funny that I just lost my taste for it, I guess, because I don't drink it like on a regular enough basis to brew it anymore. It's definitely a unique thing.
Along those lines, does anybody make vinegar? I've been looking. I got a vinegar mother from Eric at Brew Your Own Beer because I wanted to use a stronger strength than you tend to get from vinegar, and vinegar made from beer is Elgar. So I wondered, we have malt vinegar now, which is a modern version, but you can actually get a lot stronger as well. So I keep thinking, especially with a bad batch of beer, it'd be good to just toss it in with a vinegar mother and get 5 gallons of really good vinegar.
I might be interested in a vinegar mother. That seems interesting. My wife also makes bangin' kimchi and sourdough starter. So if you ever need tips on that too, we do a lot of fermenting around here.
Oh, that's my alley.
Chris, do you guys do sauerkraut as well?
Yeah, we have. We prefer kimchi. I think that just the dynamics of it, and we eat a lot of Asian food, so the whole family eats through that stuff really fast, and it's so good for you on so many levels. And we use a lot of different vegetables too, so we're part of CSAs where we get big weekly supplies, and Marie makes like 3-gallon batches of kimchi at a time, so it's like a lot.
Actually, with that vinegar mother going around, and this being very close to harvest season, I could see pickling up a lot of vegetables, using that as a starter.
Yeah, there's a really great Indonesian recipe called gado-gado, which is a beautiful pickled cabbage vegetable recipe with peanut sauce on top of it, and it's phenomenal. We may try that. Thanks.
Sounds good to me. Anybody have any brew days coming up? Oh, what's that? Fermentation book. The Art of Fermentation. Oh,
Paul, mute yourself.
You're muted, Paul.
Yeah, this is it's a tome to all fermentation. It won the James Beard Award, but this is a good resource for everything fermentation. It has a little bit of beer in it, but it's lots of vegetables and sourdough and kimchi and all that sort of stuff. So I would recommend this book. And I'm also interested in vinegar and Scobies for anyone who's willing to give me some others.
We got big fat ones.
Yeah, it's kind of part of my disease that every time I see something, I think about fermenting it. It's a really bad problem that I have. I think I'm in good company here.
Hey, has anybody brewed with raisins by chance?
No.
Yes.
All right, let's go.
So actually, kvass.
Are you muted?
Sometimes you can throw in a handful of raisins, and depending on what you're using, you get the sweetness out of there, but you also get there's some yeast depending on how they've treated them. But my experience has been limited to kvass, which you're talking about like 2%, and as a product.
The only experience I have with brewing with raisins is my dad makes a sake where he puts a couple pounds of raisins into it from the food processor. It was foreign to me, but he claims this is his top of the line sake recipe.
Yeah, one of the things about buying foods off the supermarket shelf that you got to worry about is that if you're dropping it in the fermenter, it may contain preservatives that are going to inhibit your yeast. So you probably shouldn't use too much in there. I definitely had a famous incident when I was brewing where I bought some cranberry juice extract concentrate that had preservatives in it, and I basically made a port out of my beer because it totally stopped the ferment at a time when there was still high sugar, plus I was adding sugar. So it was really sweet beer. People loved it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So you got to be careful about these things.
Yeah, I'm trying to make I've had a couple oatmeal raisin brown ales, like imperial brown ales. And I'm interested in trying to make one myself. It kind of seems like quite the challenge of balancing thanks so much, the raisin flavor along with the brown ale itself without it either fermenting out or how to properly brew it. So I also heard that raisins, just the way how they blow up, are a challenge.
When do you add the raisins?
That'd be awesome.
Like, do you add the raisins in the secondary, or do you put them I'm just trying to understand how the raisins fit in.
I've read people will blend raisins and put it in like the last 10 minutes, almost like it's a spice. And I've also heard a bunch of different ways. So I wasn't sure if anybody's toyed with that or has any advice, whether good or bad, or what to do or what to avoid and things like that. So
Got me curious now.
thank you all.
I might have to do a batch like that.
Adding fresh fruit to beer can really set a fermentation going, though. I mean, yeast, they live on the surface of fruits. I mean, that's where they're coming from, and they love that stuff. So when you throw, like, fresh fruit into a beer, you better have extra headspace in your fermenter or a very clean blow-off tube, because stuff's going to start happening there pretty quick. So just be ready for that if you're putting a lot of raisins in. Bar the whole issue of whether or not there are preservatives in there, which might inhibit that. The other end of that spectrum is that fruit makes yeast crazy. It's like, the Jersey Shore when they released this from the COVID restrictions. It was just like everything's berserk.
It's a very nice analogy. Thank you.
That's like Wildwood today.
All right. Any other questions?
I was wondering if anyone had experience fermenting under pressure, like in a keg or something.
We do have someone who does that.
Okay, well, I just got like a spunning valve, and I pitched my first one yesterday.
Okay.
And I was wondering, I mostly hear like you either do it for ester suppression or like for dry hopping. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
When I did it, I was doing it specifically for ester suppression, trying to do a lager in a week to see if that was even, I saw a couple of videos online and I thought, how is that even possible? I did it and I was blown away. It I had a clean lager done in a week with, you let your fermentation run halfway through, put your spunding valve on, let it go, under 10 psi for the rest of the time. Really worked. The second time I did it, I would say, so I mean, if you're worried about a quick turnaround, as long as you've got a quick consumption, I think it's going to be okay. Was it apples to apples with another lager? It didn't hold up over time for some reason. But initially, yeah, it came out as clean, crisp, as if the same recipe I did at lager temperatures for 6 weeks following that. I was impressed. I haven't done it for dry hopping.
So what you're saying is that the reason to be fermenting under pressure then would be to accelerate the aging process in a way, that it takes the diacetyl rest and all of that other good stuff out of the equation, and you get a clean beer. You can get a lager in a week, 10 days, you're saying?
If you don't, so I think especially if you don't have temperature control, if you want to be able to ferment at ale temperatures, with an ale, well, quicker even than an ale turnaround, lager profile, yeah. I'm still on the fence about, whether, okay, should I tie up a fermentation chamber for 6 weeks to get the true lagering, or is this good enough, at 10 psi for a week? So far, one data point, it worked out really well.
I did it once for a Pilsner. Only once. I made a spunding valve, did it in a keg. It turned out okay, but actually got a little bit better after it was in the after it was on tap for, I'd say, 2 weeks or so. And because I was having trouble clearing it, even after it was at cold temperatures, it might have fermented a little hot, but for under pressure, that wasn't a big deal. Probably went at about 70. But after it sat in the kegerator for 2 weeks, it somehow just cleared up and flipped over, and it was actually, I wouldn't say it was like a top of the line or anything Pilsner, but it was what I would consider a drinkable Pilsner.
Yeah, I've done it a few times myself, both with great results. Honestly, between fermenting under pressure and using gelatin, compared to most homebrews, the differences are, I'd say, marginal. Also, I know, I'm not trying to put it on the spot, but I know Mike Hume has also done it a little bit as well. But enough people have tried it where, it's a great alternative, especially if you're just stuck in a spot where you can't lauter, you don't want to wait as long. The differences are quite minimal, especially for how fast you can turn it over and have a crushable summer beer.
Hey, Sean, question. Are we still, is there a, whatever club or virtual brew still this Saturday, or any
So it's
update
on
on
the
that?
calendar. Yeah, it is on the calendar. I don't know if anyone is planning to brew. I was going to talk about that quickly to see if anyone was brewing this weekend and wanted to join the virtual brew day. Is anyone able to do it? Does anyone want to do it?
Making a cream ale this weekend. I'd join in.
All right.
I was planning to join in.
Okay, great.
I would love to use it as a motivator to brew, but I don't want you to be upset if I don't.
We won't. You can just join.
Yeah. I really want to, and I think that I will. So count me.
Maybe this will help add motivation to you brewing. Because we'll just shame
Pressure is
you.
on.
If you don't show up, then we'll shame you.
We're planning on it.
Yeah, we're planning on it. So we're thinking like roughly 10-1, give or take.
Yeah,
right.
Give or take. Yep. Great.
So first, what is that? Is it we all just do basically a Zoom while we're brewing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just hang out, talk about what you're brewing, maybe show your setup. Complain about things going wrong. Or...
Yeah. I have a batch that I want to brew. I wasn't sure if I was going to get to it this weekend or next weekend, but I'll try and do it on Sunday.
Perfect. Okay.
It works out because you have like 10 other people on the Zoom call watching out for your boil over. So it helps.
Yeah. Or there was like the one day that I brewed and I was the only one brewing, and all of you just sat there and watched me and critiqued everything I did.
Backseat brewing.
All right. Sean, we didn't sit there and just watch. We were yelling into the microphone so your phone would shake into the brew kettle.
We're lucky. I was lucky, I guess.
I want to. I think I'll be more inclined to do next weekend myself. So if we want to do another one next weekend, I'll be hanging out Saturday if we're doing a virtual brew day.
I'm in the same boat as Mike Bragi. I might be able to work this weekend, or might be able to make it work this weekend, but would be more inclined to next weekend.
I mean, here's the beauty of the virtual brew day. We can do both. And which it's really whoever shows up.
Yeah, I'll do both.
There we go.
I'll be there Saturday. I'm just not to be a downer. I'm putting my dog down on Saturday, so I don't think I can commit to brewing.
No.
But I want to be around.
Okay.
Cool.
I may be there to support, but yeah, I won't be able to brew. I can't leave I can't take that chance.
Why is that, Jake?
Yeah, what's going on, Jake? Why don't you tell us?
Shut up. The people that were supposed to know what was going on knew what's going on. No, my wife's due next Friday, and for our baby, and I can't leave a wart just boiling there unattended and run to the hospital.
You can't leave your wife waiting in labor until you're done brewing.
Yes, that's right. I can't. Babe, can you hold that for 2 more hours? I'm done with the brew.
It's only another hour. Just
What's that?
one more hour.
My wife said only if she gets to have some afterwards.
Oh, there.
Cross your legs.
Yeah. Everybody needs to send homebrew to Jake's house.
Oh, Jesus.
Caravan. We'll drop it off.
Oh, God.
I know.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording unless we're done on all the official stuff. But just again, that's thanks to Alex and to Dave for the presentations tonight. I really appreciate it. And honestly, this was one of the first times that we've had a member volunteer to present. So just Dave, thank you. Alex has done in-person meetings. If you have something you want to share and discuss, we are always looking for presenters. So please, let us know. We welcome it, especially in this Zoom setting. It's even easier to do than when we do things in person. So, just let us know. Join a board meeting and let us know. And we can always figure it out.